Natalie Nixon with Wonder Rigor.
What I'd like to talk about is create like your life depends on it, because it does. And I want to start with sharing some eureka moments that happened to me this summer. I was able to spend 2 weeks this summer in Shenzhen, China, serving as a mentor for an accelerator startup. And Shenzhen is the 4th largest city in China. For me, it felt like the size of about 2 Manhattans. And the first eureka moment that occurred to me was that it is virtually a cashless society. So whether it was the food truck person receiving payment or the bike taxi person, everything was QR code scanning. And here at home, I feel like I'm finally getting my act together because I use Apple Wallet on a regular basis. The second major eureka moment came when I was at breakfast one morning with the gentleman to the right of the screen. That's Mart Masick. And Mart is the director of the innovation lab at SEB Bank in Stockholm, Sweden. So SEB is the second largest bank, I think, in Estonia, maybe the first or second largest bank in Stockholm. And we're casually talking at breakfast, and Mart happens to just mention the chip in his hand. And I said, wait, hang on, you have a chip in your hand? And he said, yeah, it's right here. And he began to explain to me how his lab decided that rather than just have the word innovation in the name, they needed to really actually demonstrate innovation. And so they have beer and chips parties, and tattoo artists come, and it's totally opting in, and they get a chip injected into their hand if they wish. And it allows him to lock his bicycle. It allows him to enter and exit the building. He may even use it for public transportation. And so some of the things I definitely took away were that opting into things like a more cashless society, having not just wearable technology but embedded technology, definitely has cultural context. I'm not so sure that in the United States of America we would be running to do this as openly because of we know our values around privacy and individualism. So the 4th Industrial Revolution is really around this new reality of us being tethered to technology in very different ways, through cloud, and being manifest in robotics, and augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, cryptocurrency, and those sorts of things. It's meant that identity in the digital era has become much more complex, and it's definitely seamless, intertwined, and integrated into our lives. So as Anthony at Audi Wynwood explained to me this summer when I happily purchased my new car, he said, basically, Natalie, your car will become your phone. That's how seamless it's getting. So essentially, digital platforms have blurred boundaries in the future of work, both temporally and spatially. And what I mean by that, temporally, in the sense that the future of work is not so far in the future. It actually is right here, as I've just shared 2 examples that are happening in China. And it allows us to data mine way back into the past, and it also allows us to access and anticipate way into the future because of our access to information. Spatially, boundaries have blurred as well, because where exactly is where? For example, when you think about all the multitudes and ways we can work with people in continents far, far away and across many, many different time zones. So a lot of people are concerned about the 4th Industrial Revolution, specifically, I think, much more in the United States. And in my travels, I don't see the same level of anxiety in other parts of the world. Basically, what we're talking about is a really different shift. In our previous industrial revolutions, let's take the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the 20th century, it was really about a shift of having humans adapt to the technology. And then we got to the point of the technology almost being an appendage to humans. Now the opportunity is for the technology to adapt to humans and to amplify our lives. And I really like the way Galit Ariel has said it. She's a digital brand strategist, and she points out that the greatest purpose of tech is to serve humanity and create a better human experience. People want tech to elevate their reality, not replace it. Similarly, Shelley Palmer, who is a consultant and a musician, He has pointed out in this really cool article that PricewaterhouseCoopers publishes this magazine about artificial imagination. He pointed out that to get the most out of an algorithm, you must ask the right questions, right? So those cognitive, non-repetitive tasks are going to be hard to replicate. So it's the human, what I call the human quotient, the ability to create and frame better questions is going to be essential in our ability to not feel threatened by technology and remain competitive with it, but to figure out how it can amplify our lives. So the quest for the human quotient is stronger than ever today. For example, Satya Nadella, the president of Microsoft, who'd have thunk it, he actually put the word soul and technology together. In his book, Hit Refresh, one of his early statements in the book, he writes that we needed to build deeper empathy for our customers and their unarticulated, unmet needs. It was time to hit refresh. The World Economic Forum is also talking about this growing need for the human quotient. They talk about the power of trust and values in the fourth industrial revolution. And this is a Canadian bank, ATB Financial. There's a couple interesting things about this statement. Number one, here's a bank that's talking about well-being and happiness in the same time that they're talking about mortgage instruments. But also, Trudy Chalmers is a behavioral neuroscientist. So I love that they're borrowing a page from, if any of you watch the Showtime hit show Billions, where they have a character, Wendy Rhodes, who's an organizational psychologist who's part of the C-suite. But starting to integrate very different capacities and skill sets in our organizations who are upping the ante for the human quotient is essential. And then 2 years ago in the Wall Street Journal, they and other mags have started to continue to talk about how employers are finding soft skills like critical thinking in short supply. Soft skills, in my view, are not so touchy-feely. Soft skills are actually hardcore strength skills. They are the emotional intelligence that we've been hearing about this morning. They are your capacity for empathy, your capacity to work collaboratively and to intuit. And they will be everything in this fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution requires soft skills, especially in what we think of as VUCA environments, and environments that are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. So a word about complexity. Complexity is not new. So if we look at the ancient Bedouin people from the Middle East who, said, let's make a go of it in an incredibly changing environment, and they've managed to survive and live in an adaptive way with the desert for centuries. Even the ingenuity it took to build the pyramids, that was about complexity. Complexity just looks differently today in our urban areas. And humans, we are, by design, complex systems. So complexity is nothing new, and to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. My proposal is that we navigate and manage complexity with complexity, specifically with creativity, which I believe is a complex system. So I've been doodling, fiddling, and tinkering a lot with this idea about what is creativity. And I developed this framework I call the 3I creativity framework. I think creativity is this complex system that's grounded in curiosity and requires us to improvise, which is about the remix. It's about reconnecting things in new ways in the moment. It's about intuition, which is, in my view, pattern recognition. And that gets us to insight and impact. To nerd out a little bit, and I think there's a common theme among some of us on the stage this morning. We are self-affirmed nerds. Creativity is a complex system, and if we really want to understand complexity, we have to delve further back theoretically into chaos theory. So complexity is actually a chaotic system, and chaotic is a word that a gentleman named D. Hock made up. D was the founder of the Visa credit card company. And when he was given the task of forming Visa, he said, I don't want to form an organization with those traditional structures of boxes and arrows. Organizations consist of humans. Humans are unpredictable, Humans are inconsistent. Why not mimic structures that come from nature? And he observed that in nature, we have these emergent, adaptive, self-organizing systems that consist of both chaos, which is not anarchy, chaos is randomness, and order, which is not control, order is structure. So we see chaotic systems in nature, the way the Amazon jungle has formed over time. We see it in the way our bodies heal. There are self-organizing adaptive systems if you skin your elbow. And we see chaotic systems in any kind of improvisational system, such as jazz, where there is the randomness of responding in the moment, that's the chaos, but there's also the order of knowing music theory and incessant practice. So around the time that I started learning about chaotic systems in my professional life, I started working a lot more with startup leaders and entrepreneurs. And I began to observe a pattern in the origin stories of startup leaders and entrepreneurs. Typically, there is this moment where a startup leader will say something like, "Something told me not to do the deal." Or something told me to work with her over him, even though her pedigree wasn't as sniffy. And I thought, what is that something? It wasn't something that we're teaching in business school, but to every successful entrepreneur, they referenced it. I decided that something is intuition. So going back to the framework of how I explain creativity, I decided to do a deeper dive into that component of it, of intuition. And I have a background in anthropology and fashion, and decided to do a miniature ethnography on intuitive leadership. And I thought to myself, if I wanted to do observational studies and have conversations with people who my assumption is they use a lot of intuition and pattern recognition in the work, with whom would I want to speak? And I decided I want to speak to chefs. I'd want to speak to DJs. I spoke to, for example, King Britt. I spoke to Dan Stern of R2L restaurant. I'd want to speak to first responders. And I definitely wanted to speak to dancers. I have a background in dance. Christine Cox of Ballet X gave me some of her time. And I ended up really lobbing on much more heavily to dancers, because it turns out that dancers can teach us a ton about innovation. Here are 3 ways that they can teach us about innovation. Dancers are systems designers, especially dancer choreographers. And there is a difference between those who are skilled as dancers and those who are skilled as choreographers. They're 2 different events and 2 different practices and skill sets. But choreographers must have the ability to zoom in and zoom out and work at various levels of scale. The second observation about the ways that dancer choreographers problem solve, which was really interesting to me, is that they're kinesthetic, which means that they have to move and make in order to learn. It's not totally a mental exercise. Designers and a lot of other people work in the same way. But this need to move and make and tinker and play with the body as the instrument is critical. And the third piece, which was really interesting to me about the way dancers problem solve, is the intensive amount of discipline, which shows up on stage. And you just saw that before I started speaking, right? So there's this intensive amount of discipline, and the physical discipline is preceded by a mental discipline. But there's something else, because artists can be incredibly skillful in their technique, but it may not touch us, the observer, the participants in the audience, right? So there's something else, and that led me to this concept of wonder and rigor. Because I was also observing in my corporate client work as a strategist that there was this intensive amount of emphasis on rigor, on process, on procedure, on meetings, on check sheets, on checklists. I also saw it in my career, 16 years as a professor in higher education. But here's the thing, rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. And I was actually revisiting this structure of chaotic systems. So here again, chaotic systems was rearing its head. So here's what I mean by wonder. Wonder is about daydreaming and pretending and awe and pausing and curiosity. And the Jewish theologian and social activist Abraham Heschel was famous for having written that wonder, rather than doubt, is the root of all knowledge. So in our quest to innovate, in our quest to survive and navigate this fourth industrial revolution, it is essential that we give space and time for wonder. Simultaneously, we also have to value rigor. And rigor is practice, it's critique, it's time on task, it's commitment, it's showing up. It's not sexy. It's often very alienating, very lonely, very solitary work. But here's what I think. This is what I've said. Rigor can't be sustained without wonder. And the corollary to that statement is that wonder is found in the midst of rigor, in the midst of doing those rigorous tasks that get us to the point of excellence. That's where we often can find rigor. I've been tinkering with this idea, and I've been experimenting with it with different organizations with which I work, and I've now moved to where I've developed a card game, and it's still at its prototype stage. I brought it with me if anyone's interested in checking out during a break, but it's really a creativity tool for business, and as it turns out, Wonder Rigor actually leads to really important business results. So there's business impact when we practice Wonder Rigor. For example, through Wonder Rigor and practicing it through this accessory or something like this game, there's an increase of inventiveness in people's mindset, which means that we have much more interesting business models, which reveal new market segments and better return on investment. Practicing Wonder Rigor in another way, in terms of its business impact, means that we are collaborating in a much more intentional way, which means that we have much more aligned strategic decision-making, greater efficiency in organizations, and costs go down. So there absolutely is a direct correlation between in the business case for Wonder Rigor. So the way I built out the Wonder Rigor card game was really through being inspired by Warren Berger, who is the author of a book which I love and highly recommend you read called A More Beautiful Question. And I was so inspired by this because his point is that asking questions is a way of thinking. Asking questions has become equivalent to ignorance, and so we fear asking questions. But as little people, that's how we grow and learn about our environment and society. So we've got to continually be asking questions. So I designed the card game to be a series of question prompts to really foster what I call inquiry-based leadership. So the design I credit to the awesome company Pixel Parlor, which is based right here in Fishtown in Philly. And here's an example. We start out with mindset cards just to kind of prime the pump of thinking in these more wondrous and rigorous ways. So here's an example of a mindset card as it aligns to wonder. The Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi is all about the acceptance of transience and imperfection. How comfortable would you say you are with ambiguity? Share a time when you felt great uncertainty and flowed with it. Why did you take that approach? And what have you learned from that experience? And these are prompt questions that can be done in a team. They can also be done solo. The game then moves on to catalyst questions, which is to help you to start applying the Wonder Rigor to a task at hand. So thinking more specifically in your own work, in your own world, here's an example of a catalyst card for rigor. Who are your mentors and your models for rigor? What makes them excel at rigor? And the conversations that come through that. I've been, when I had my prototype version 1.1 about a year ago, I experimented with this with a group from IBM Design. I was able to share this out with a group here in Philly, a branding strategy company called Karma. I've now shared it with a group of vice presidents of development and advancement from universities. And each time I learn how to refine it and how to make it more relevant. So after the mindset cards, after the catalyst cards, here's really where I think the value comes. People are asked to identify a task at hand, a challenge that they're working on that they may feel a little stuck on, as a team, individually, and identify where present state on the wonder rigor 2x2 they land. Because as any good strategist, I make a bunch of 2x2s. So, and I'm going to go through each quadrant momentarily. But the goal is to figure out where present state, what's the method that I'm using to work through this problem? Am I working it through hacking through it? Am I working through it as a provocateur? Am I working through it as to really do deep, detailed specialization work? And then identify what's your future state goal. How in the future do you want to be working through this task or challenge or problem? So as I'm concluding this, I just want to share what those 4 modes are of wonder and rigor. I'll start with the lower bottom quadrant where we're operating with tons of rigor and very little wonder. That's the specialized modality. And when you need to specialize, it's when you're ready to work in great detail, hone in on specificity, and you probably are a bit risk averse, or you don't need to really take on a lot of risk with a particular task or problem. If you're in the hacking mode and you need to hack, you are working with the knowledge and the resources that you have at hand, and you're working very quickly to problem solve. And underneath all of these are prompts and questions to help you to do these things. If you are in the provoke mode, or you need to provoke, it's when you want to blow up the status quo and you want to think incredibly audaciously and aspiraciously and work in that way. And then finally, in the invent modality, that's where you are integrating both market leadership and thought leadership, both intuition and strategy. And it's this integrative way of working that helps us to ebb and flow between each of these quadrants. The goal of Wonder Rigor is not to say, I am this type. This is not a personality profile, but it's a diagnostic tool to help build better teaming and even to help with hiring and recruiting. So to conclude, for me, what Wonder Rigor is really building out is that, and it's pointing out and revealing to me, is the 4 shifts that we have got to make in this 4th industrial revolution. Sorry for the font being so light, but the first shift is moving away from working in silos to being ambiguous confident. The second shift is moving away to only being valued and self-identifying as a deep specialist, to what my friends Mickelson and Martin, the authors of a great book called The Neo-Generalist, call neo-generalism, which is a new sort of skill set, not being a T-shaped thinker, but more of a pie-shaped thinker, and almost a type of a polymath. The third shift is moving away from skill set to purpose, which we've also heard a lot about from speakers today. And finally, the 4th shift is to move away from only focus on procedure to being improvisational, because none of us wakes up every day with a script. That's just a mythology. So the future of work will require us to be more ambiguous confident, to connect as neo-generalists, lead with purpose, and work improvisationally. The future of work and learning, in my view, is about wonder and rigor. Thank you.